Hey everybody, so today I just wanted to do a little story time about my travel from the US to Kazakhstan this past January. I actually went from Kazakhstan to the US in December to see my family, and then I came back to do my job, and I want to explain kind of what my experience was like traveling abroad during these times. So the first thing I should mention is that when I was traveling, I'm not sure about now, but when I was traveling, you needed to have a COVID test if you were a foreigner arriving into Kazakhstan. If you were arriving into Kazakhstan as a Kazakh national, you could take it when you get there. But to be honest, almost all airlines require you to have the COVID test as proof if the country you're going to requires a COVID test. So basically, you need a COVID test to fly. And the thing about the COVID test for entering Kazakhstan is that they require the test to be no more than 3 days prior to your arrival. So I had to find a place that would give me a COVID test very quickly. Like here in Kazakhstan, you can actually take a COVID test and then get the results within a few hours, like within the same day. But I searched everywhere, but at least in my area, I could not find anything like that for a PCR COVID test. They have rapid tests, but it's not quite the same, and I was worried that I wouldn't get on the plane if I had that test. So I was looking for a PCR test, and they were all saying it takes at least 24 hours. So I was like, oh, are they gonna let me in if I took the test? And then the next day I get the results, and because of the time change and stuff like that, I was worried it wasn't gonna work. Finally, I found a clinic that would give me the test in 24 hours. So I decided to take the test late in the day before my flight, so that in 24 hours it would be there. But the thing is, 24 hours later, it still hadn't arrived, this test results. And I was actually sitting with my neighbors waiting for this test. I was saying goodbye to them, but it was like an hour before I needed to leave for the airport, and they have a baby, and I was like, what if I get these results and I'm positive and I get like everybody actually sick here, or everyone's already sick here, you know? I was waiting for an email on my phone. I finally got the email. They were all talking, and I was like, I opened it and it was negative. I was like, oh, thank the Lord. Because I was worried I wasn't going to get the test and it was going to be positive. Not like I was doing anything to make myself be tested positive. You just kind of never know. I was planning to vlog this whole thing, but I was so anxious and caught up in everything that I left my camera at home. And like 5 minutes into driving to the airport, I realized I left it at home, and there was really bad rain that day, like a real thunderstorm. There was reports of hail, so like blocks of ice falling from the sky. So I was like, we can't turn back because the traffic's so bad with a thunderstorm. It was raining really hard, and I thought, I'm not even gonna make it to my flight because the traffic's so bad. So I was really nervous, and I was like, Mom, drive safe, but drive fast. But that's just the beginning of it. What I was actually nervous about is that when I get to the airport, they weren't going to accept my COVID test. I'm flying with Turkish Airlines. I always fly with Turkish Airlines from Kazakhstan to the US or the US to Kazakhstan because it has the most direct flight. There's only one layover in Istanbul, quite efficient for getting to Kazakhstan from Houston, Texas. So I get to the airport and I start waiting in line. And as I'm waiting in line, there's actually someone going to Turkey, a Turkish national. And he gets to the front, and he hadn't taken a COVID test. And he was like, but I'm Turkish, I'm flying to Turkey, it's all right. And they were like, nope, you have to have a test in order to get there. So they refused him, he couldn't go. And I was like, I can't be refused. Please don't refuse me, because I had to teach in a few days. And I knew there wouldn't be a flight in time for me to get there fast enough to start teaching. Not that I teach in person, I'm still teaching online, but I was gonna miss, some time. So I get to the front and I see there's many Turkish Airlines people checking people in. And there's some men, some women, and I was like, I hope I get a woman because maybe she'll feel pity for me. And I told this story later on to a different friend, and she was like, why didn't you want a man? You could convince him. And I was like, girl, I have like zero influence as a woman on men. Like, I'm not about to convince anybody. I'm not about to persuade any man to let me on these flights. I thought a woman would like be compassionate towards me. I'm going forward and a woman's spot opens up. So I go there, I hand her my passport, my COVID test, and some documents that prove that I'm allowed to get into Kazakhstan. Because if you're a foreigner entering Kazakhstan, you have several requirements. One, you must have a visa. And then that place that you work at that gives you the visa needs to be approved by some part of the government. Now, which part, I'm not sure. But basically, you have to be on this approved list, like you're actually allowed in. Anybody with a visa can't just come in and out. It's like specifically certain institutions or certain businesses have filed for this like special entry. So I had those papers as well. I give everything over and I was like really like, I see she's checking the COVID test. It looks like she's like looking at some calendar, and I had heard from some other people coming from the US to Kazakhstan months before that they had some problems because the time difference change and then the amount of time it takes you to fly. It is actually within the 3 days, but some Turkish airline workers were doing the math wrong and basically not letting people go or forcing them to stay in Istanbul for a day to take another COVID test and then go again. And she stops looking at that and then she looks at my passport and she's like, "Where's your visa?" And my visa's in the back of my passport, so I was like, "It's in the back, just go." So she goes to the back, she sees it, and she's like checking things, and she says, "Are you allowed to go into Kazakhstan?" And I was like, "Yes, I'm allowed. Like, trust me, I'm allowed to get in. My institution is on that list." And she was like, "Okay." And then she asked me to put my luggage to be weighed. I was like, "Oh, I've made it." So I put my luggage on there, everything's fine, my tickets are printed, and then you have to get taken to another line where they check your COVID test again. So I was in another line, but this time, I felt like, I'm gonna make it, this is fine. That went by totally fine. And going through security, you know, people have masks on, people have gloves on, the people who check your passport, they also have like a shield in front of them. But that went by fine. I'm waiting for my flight. And of course, as people get on the flight, board the flight, there's no social distancing. There's like overhead announcements that are like, "Please social distance." But also, there's like no room for social distancing on the plane. And I forgot to mention, while waiting in line, they also provide you these sanitary packets or hygiene packets, which have 2 masks, a bottle of hand sanitizer, and a sanitation wipe. Now, I didn't know this before, but I guess Turkish Airlines requires your mask to be a medical mask. So one of those disposable masks. You can't have a reusable mask, like a mask made out of cloth or whatever else people make masks out of these days. It can't be a bandana or anything. It has to be the medical masks. So if you board the plane with a cloth mask or a homemade mask or any type of other covering, the flight attendants will force you to use those medical masks provided in the package. Now, for the economy class, they give you food in a paper bag, everything's sealed. But I saw for the business class, I saw them getting the regular hot meals, and I was sad. But it seems during these special times, Turkish Airlines is only giving people a bag, and inside is a sandwich, juice, water bottle, and a little piece of cake, all individually wrapped. And as they're handing out food, there's also an announcement that says, "Please don't take off your mask and eat at the same time as the people next to you." So when I first was flying, I tried to follow this because nobody else was following this except maybe me in my general area, who knows, in other parts of the plane. And you know, if you have food right in front of you and you see other people eating, it takes a long time for them to finish. You know, I'm just waiting there. There's nothing else to do on an 11-hour flight except sleep or watch movies. I can't sleep very well on planes, and I can tell you I watched a lot of movies, but just waiting there for food, food is one of the entertainments. So I'm waiting. These people aren't finished yet, and I'm just waiting there, and I see the flight attendants are already trying to collect trash. So I was like, I know those flight attendants aren't going to come back for trash, and I don't want to hold it this whole flight, or I also don't like pushing the button and be like, "Take this, please." So I took off my mask and I started eating too, and I realized that nobody was being polite and waiting, so yeah. And then I was able to throw away my trash with everybody else's trash. And the rest of the time, of course, they say to wear your mask, which I don't know if you've ever had to wear a mask for an extended period of time. but it can get quite annoying, especially when you're trying to sleep, like I was. Trying is the key word there. And I saw as I went to go to the restroom or sometimes stood up that a lot of the older people, let's say people over 40, I'm not saying people over 40 are old, but they are older than me. Those people who are older than me, 40 or above, a lot of them would take off their masks or put it like here as they were sleeping or doing other thing. And I was like, ah. But to be fair, the flight attendants weren't patrolling every 5 minutes. But when they did see somebody not wearing their mask, they told them to put it on all the way, which is just, you know, their standard procedure. When we landed in Istanbul, my flight was a little late, so I had to rush to get to my next flight. And for the next flight, of course, that flight was going into Kazakhstan. So they had 2 or 3 people working for Turkish Airlines right before the gate, before like the waiting area, because in Istanbul's airport, the waiting areas are also blocked off. They have like a double check basically of where you're going. Depending on where you're going, there's different security measures. So they had 3 people standing there checking the visas and checking the PCR COVID tests again. They weren't being fair, you know, they weren't asking the same questions to everybody. So when I came up, they looked at my visa, they looked at my COVID test, and they said, oh, it was a woman. She said, oh, why are you going to Kazakhstan? I said, oh, for work. And then she said, can you show me those documents that prove you could go? And the guy next to me, he got asked, why are you going there? And he said, for work. And they were allowed to go. And I had to show my paperwork, but whatever. I'm not going to complain about it, but except I just did. So, and by this time, I've changed my mask. So new mask on for the next 5-hour flight. And on this flight, they did the same things. It's a much smaller airplane, of course. They have the same hygiene packet that they can give you. And that flight is much more bearable. Let me tell you, like more than 6 hours on a plane, that's when it starts to get bad. Now, 5 hours, totally manageable for me. And then arriving into Kazakhstan, there is another checkpoint where they check your COVID test again. And then they give you this little square sheet of paper with a stamp on it. And I know in Kazakhstan, whenever you get a little stamp of paper, even though it looks useless, keep it. There could be different use for these different stamped slips of paper, but I was like, I need to keep this because I don't know what it means. They just stamped it. And then going into immigration, of course, I picked the line that was the absolute slowest. So I was like one of the last people to get out. And just in case you're coming to Kazakhstan, the immigration people do speak English, but if you know any amount of Russian, they're going to speak to you in Russian first. So I go through that, speaking the limited amount of Russian, you know, ask you where you work, or they ask you why you're coming in, where you work, that type of thing. And by the time I got out, my baggage was there. So I was able to easily pick it up. And then my taxi driver tried to scam me, but that's not part of this story, and that happens in a lot of countries, so not surprising. So that's my story of traveling from the US to Kazakhstan during these uncertain times. I actually kind of like these story time or talk story videos just because you can turn them on in the back and kind of listen while you're doing other things. If you've done that to me today, you turned me on, ooh, I didn't mean it that way. You've played this video and did something else, totally fine with me. I just hope I was a little entertaining in this one. And thank you so much for watching this video all the way to the end. So I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.